I'm Dr. Bart Rademaker, prescription for your transformation, real people, real conversations, and real success. And so think about how we actually use language. Are we really aware of how we actually use language correctly or incorrectly? And language is everything. Yes, we communicate through a variety of different means, communicate through specific body language. We communicate through the intonation of our voice. And as you notice, what am I communicating right now? And you may be wondering, what is it that I'm really communicating right now? And so here's what's interesting. As I'm getting set up on Facebook Live with this whole communication process, and you listen to my intonation and the hesitancy, you'll notice that, yes, what's going on? And actually, to be truthful, what's really going on is I'm dealing with another technical glitch as I'm trying to make sure that everything is working the way that it needs to be working. So what is it that I'm really communicating? And so when we talk about communication in our own lives, it really comes down also to the words that we use. Are they divisive? Are they clear? And the other part is simply this, and this is a concept that very few people really appreciate. The feedback that you get is the communication that you've provided. So when you communicate with somebody and you get a certain kind of feedback, that's exactly what you've communicated. Whether you agree with the feedback or not, it is the communication that you've provided. I'm very excited today to be introducing a remarkable figure, an amazing woman, and I have to read my notes here because there's so many things to tell you about her. Let me get her on screen right now so that you get an immediate visual. Dr. Janet Smith Warfield. She's a word awareness expert, a consciousness educator, the person that helps you stand in your own power, and she is was awarded the top female motivational speaker of the year from the International Association of Top Professionals. So Janet, Dr. Janet, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be lots of fun, Bart.
I know it is because we've already had a lot of fun in a little trip down to the South Pacific some time ago, and where we were mincing words. But today is different. Today is about you, and today is about your purpose in life. And I asked you, at the beginning of the show, why are you doing all this? Because what you're doing is really quite remarkable. I find it fascinating. You're very conscious about language and words. I've also become, as I like to eloquently put it, the word Nazi, really very specific about what words we actually use. And there she goes. She's shaking her head. And so I like the word, the term that you use. What's the term that you use again? Word awareness expert. So tell us the story, how this all began, because I understand it began with a question.
It didn't begin, well, it began with a problem.
Okay.
I was a young mother. I had three preschool age sons. The oldest was 5, and then I had another one who was 3 and another one who had just been born. And when my third son, Russ, was born, my 5-year-old, Bill, began wetting the bed. He had been toilet trained for quite a while. When this third son came along, he began wetting the bed every single night. This was the last thing I needed because I was extremely busy trying to take care of 3 little boys. And at first, so how do I deal with this? At first, I figured I would ignore it. Maybe it would go away on its own. It didn't. Bill continued to wet the bed every single morning. And of course, being the perfect wife and mother, I had to change the sheets and wash his pajamas and make the bed again. And I didn't have the time to do all this, but I did it. Then I thought, well, maybe I need to sit down and have a talk with him and explain to him why a 5-year-old is too old to wet the bed. So we sat down and he listened very attentively. And the next morning, the bed was still wet. I was getting more and more frustrated. I raised my voice. That didn't work. The bed was still wet. I think I even spanked him once. The bed was still wet. And I knew I was getting out of control on this issue. Around that time, my mother gave me a book called Summerhill by an English schoolmaster, A.S. Neal. Neal ran a boarding school in England, and he had a very strange way of dealing with disruptive children in his classes. Instead of making them sit down and write 100 times, "I will be good," or making them stand in a corner, when a child disrupted the class, Neil gave him a penny. And more often than not, the bad behavior would stop and the child would start paying attention and learning. And I thought, well, this doesn't make any sense to me. This is not what the culture has taught me to do. But I was also at my wit's end. I had tried everything else and I was desperate. So I figured, okay, I'll give this a try. I don't understand it, but I've got a model out there that I can follow. So the next morning, the bed was again wet. I didn't say a word. I didn't know what I was doing other than following a model. I went to my wallet. I got a penny. I pulled it out. I gave it to Bill and walked away. And Bill was kind of looking out at me as if to say, wonder what's wrong with her this morning. This is not normal mother behavior. But he never wet the bed again. And I could not stop thinking about this. It was so easy. It was so simple. It solved my problems. It solved whatever was going on in Bill. And it was just plain easy and it was amazing. Well, because it had worked so well, I began playing with this whole concept. There was a day when two of Bill's friends were out in the backyard, and I could see they were in an argument. They were calling each other names, and they were getting close to throwing punches at each other. So I decided, well, time for me to go out and make an appearance. In the past, I might have pulled them both aside and given them a lecture about why they shouldn't fight. And I didn't do that. I didn't give them a penny either. But I took each one aside separately. And I asked each one the same question. I asked, do you want to fight? And they both said the same thing to me. No, I don't want to fight, but he's making me do it. So I just said to the two of them together, well, if you want to fight, go ahead and do it. And they kind of looked down at the ground and they shuffled their feet a bit and then they looked at each other out of the corners of their eyes. And 2 minutes later, they were playing happily together again. Well, all this is blowing my mind. I don't understand it, but boy, is this interesting and fun to play with. Then there was a time when a man came to my front door. He was angry, and he was angry with me. And I don't even remember who he was, what he wore, what he looked like. I think he was a neighbor, but not a close neighbor. I don't remember what he was angry about. All I remember is the anger. And in the past, I might have gotten defensive, explained why I'd done what I'd done. I didn't do any of that. Or maybe I would have said, oh, well, you shouldn't be angry over a little thing like that. I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I just said, I am so sorry. what can I do to make things right? And in an instant, the anger was gone. And when he left, we were friends. And as he walked away, why do thoughts come into your mind out of nowhere? But that's what happened to me. As he walked away, the words that came into my mind were words that I had learned as a child in Sunday school. Resist not evil, but turn the other cheek. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what those words mean. Now I understand. As a child, those words had made about as much sense to me as giving a kid a penny for bad behavior. They didn't make sense.
Right.
Why, if somebody hit me on one side of the face, should I turn and say, hit me on the other side? But in this situation, in this context, in this particular experience, those words suddenly made sense. It wasn't me allowing someone to abuse me. It ultimately was a win-win solution, because when the man left, we were friends. He won, I won, we both won, simply because I had said, I am so sorry. What can I do to make things right?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So I'm totally fascinated by all this, especially the penny part. And so I have two questions, and I'm going to give you them to you in reverse order. One is, what's really happening here, and the other one is it working because now they're being witnessed, they're being acknowledged, they're being considered for who they are versus who they aren't? Is that what is going on?
When I look at it from hindsight, yeah, I think that is. First of all, I'm giving them direct attention, and I am seeing them for who they are, not as some figment of my imagination. And your first question there was, what, to understand it? I I I really don't understand it. I will say too, it does not always work. So you can't set it as an absolute rule. But this kind of response in many situations works in just almost miraculous ways. And I could only tie it into what I had read in the Bible. And when that experience happened, it was as if I call it the human truth puzzle. All the pieces suddenly came together, and it was instantaneous. It was in a minute, not a minute. It was in a nanosecond that I suddenly understood. Everything felt unified. Everything felt together, and I didn't know what had happened to me in that instance, because my own religious rearing was Unitarian. And Unitarians don't even acknowledge experiences like this. So I couldn't talk to Unitarians about it, but I began immediately reading in all the religious literature. And
Right.
every religion you explore has these kinds of transformational salvation, awareness experiences that people have. And then people try to shape them into something that is, so they can communicate them to other people, because it's such an amazing experience. After doing some reading with William James, I decided that it was a mystical experience because it met all four characteristics of a mystical experience. It was ineffable. I couldn't talk about it because or I could talk about it, but no one was hearing what I was saying. I was met with these blank stares when I tried to talk. And how do you talk about an experience where your understanding has just suddenly shifted? You're not talking about something that's out there. What was out there hadn't changed. What changed was the way my mind and emotions and body were shaping what was out there. So the whole thing, it's a fascinating area to be playing with, really, exploring. And there's no right way to do it. It becomes very creative and co-creative.
Yeah, and I want to jump into that part as to how you've evolved and everything else. But before we go there, one thing that did pop into my mind is that when we recognize bad behavior, and let's just do a blanket sort of generalization, any behavior that's bad, it's usually a reflection of some sort of pain that's happening within a person. And so, and not knowing a better way to express themselves or handle the situation, they're just being bad. So the bedwetting is a bad thing. And just by acknowledging the fact that this person, your Bill, had pain, by giving him, the penny, was maybe just enough, where he realized, what, somebody sees my pain, I'm being witnessed, and now I can go on. And it's just a thought.
And also, I think there was I'm sure it was, I was not able to give Bill as much attention as I'd given him in the past because I had two other preschoolers to take care of. So I think it was also an acknowledgement to him that I did love him. I still loved him. Just giving him that penny somehow was a reassurance that I'm still okay and Mom still loves me.
Yeah. And actually, in my particular case, I don't believe my older brother, the middle brother, the three of us had an issue with bedwetting. He had a different solution. He just beat me up. So he used to beat me up all the time.
That wasn't fun.
No, it wasn't. So anyhow, but I understand. I mean, and again, it's understatement to say how remarkable you are and all the things that you've done over the years. And one thing that I absolutely respect and appreciate, what you were saying to me earlier, is all the transformational experiences that you've gone through. And I think that's a beautiful thing because in essence, everybody has that opportunity to go through the transformations, if they're just ready for them or they're awake or they're wanting them. And unfortunately, many people don't for whatever reason. And so I'm fascinated by the question that you originally came up with many, many years ago. And I believe it was a question that was posed to you, and it's evolved into another question. And I'd like you to share with us what the first question was and your experience, and then the evolution into the question that you have now.
Well, let me go back just a step, because after I had that experience with the man at the door, and then the words I'd learned as a child in Sunday school just popped into my head, and I put the experience together with those words. It was like, oh my God, now I understand. Now I've got it. I've got to tell everybody around me. And as I spoke about the experience with the words just flying out of my mouth, I saw these blank stares in front of me. So I was not communicating what had happened to other people, and maybe other people didn't even want to hear it. They didn't care. So then the question that popped into my mind, again, why do these things pop into your mind? I don't know. But the question then, well, it was kind of like a driving passion. How can I use analytical, divisive words? Because words always chop up and divide and separate. We use them to categorize. And we chop up our experiences somewhat arbitrarily by doing that. But anyway, the question was, how can I use analytic, divisive words to communicate a unifying, holistic experience, which is what this was. It was very integrating. As I say, all the pieces of the human truth puzzle suddenly came together for me. And I spent a lot of years playing with that question. I tried stories. I got so frustrated with words at one point that I started just drawing diagrams. I wrote poetry. I asked questions. So there were all kinds of linguistic techniques that I was trying to come up with so I could communicate this experience to other people. And none of them was perfect, although some of them tended to work better than others. And as I examined the religious and spiritual literature, I could see that some of the great spiritual teachers of the past used certain forms of language and not other forms of language. For example, Jesus spoke in parables. He told stories. Socrates asked questions. The Zen Buddhists put out these mind-bending puzzles called koans, which have no conceptual answer, but the mind struggles with them for a long time and then finally just gives up. And at that point, that's when enlightenment happens, is when the mind gives up and doesn't try to solve the koan, or solves it by just being in the moment in the body. So, and the kinds of language that I found didn't work so well were the authoritarian, doctrinal, dictatorial words that came after as religions were built on the teachings of these very spiritual masters. They became very structured, they became hierarchical, they became doctrinal. And that kind of structure, I think, from my perspective, was the antithesis of what the spiritual leaders actually intended to communicate. The question changed for me. As I say, I got so frustrated with words. I began drawing diagrams. So I have some diagrams that I work with too. And I tried the poetry. I tried everything I could think of. How can I communicate this experience? And I hit a point where I changed one word in that question. I changed the word communicate to facilitate. Then the question became, how can I use analytic, divisive words to facilitate a unifying, holistic experience? That's a total, if you think about those two questions, they have a totally different energy to them. In the question about how can I communicate, that's a very conceptual formulation of what I'm trying to do. When I talk about facilitating, I'm stepping into my own co-creative power in any situation. That means that the words become fluid, they change depending on who I'm speaking with and the words that are coming out of their mouths. So then it becomes a dance with words and a dance with wisdom.
I love it. And I think it's important. We were talking earlier on, the difference between the map and the territory outside of us and our actual experience. And I know you're familiar with neurolinguistic programming, and one of the primary directives or thoughts is that the map is not the territory. And you talk about the experience. And then in addition to that, what's the language, what's the wording that we actually get to use? And there's a word, there are many different words for anger. One's pissed off, one's peeved, one's irritated, one's frustrated, or livid. And so depending on what word you actually then use, livid towards peeved or irritated, it's a completely different experience. And it's interesting then, depending on the choice of words that people, have, people are going to have very, very different experiences. And so talk to us about that.
It's not only the choice of words, and yes, you're absolutely right. Each one of those words that you just spoke has a different energy to it, if you really stop to think about it. Livid is has a very different feeling to it from just peeved, for example. There's more rage, more passion in livid. It's not only the individual words, though. It's also the context of or the situation in which the words are being spoken. For example, if I am having a conversation with myself, it may be very useful for me to call somebody else a lot of ugly, nasty names because it brings my anger or my rage or my frustration up to a place where I can look at that. I can also shift that language. So instead of pointing my finger at somebody else, I can shift that language to, all right, what am I feeling? What am I feeling? So it puts it in the first person singular. And then maybe it's, why am I feeling this way? What happened to bring this emotion up in me? And perhaps shifts in my body as well. So it's really, I think it's helpful to bring these emotions up in a conversation with self. Now, when I'm having a conversation with a person who has just pissed me off, it's not going to be useful for me to point my finger at them and tell them what a dumbass they are and how they shouldn't have done what they did. It may be, I mean, if they're open to a conversation, it may be helpful for me to express my feelings, to say something like, I was really irritated when you didn't show up on time and said you would, or whatever it was, or you borrowed money from me and you never paid it back. That's communicating information. Now they can do what they want with it. They may deny it. They may not want to hear it because they've got some guilt around it that they haven't looked at. That's not my issue. If I want to establish communication with another person, I have to put my own truth out on the table. And the best way to do that really is first person singular. These are my words. This is my map of my territory. I'm sharing information with you. And if you're familiar with Teilhard de Chardin's noosphere, I think that's what it's about. It's just sharing information with another person. They may or may not want to hear it. I can't control that. If they don't want to hear it, I may not want to maintain or keep trying to put a lot of energy into the relationship.
I totally agree with that. And I think, I've gone one step further in a sense. And it's interesting the kind of responses that I get when I say these words. But when I'm irritated with someone by something, I actually use the word, I've chosen to be irritated, or I've made a choice to be irritated by your actions. And it kind of does a squirrely thing in their head. It says, what? You're choosing what? And interesting enough, sometimes I think people misinterpret that and realize that it's now my fault, and they assume no responsibility for what they've done. And that's okay, because ultimately it's all about me. What am I deciding to look at? What is it that I'm deciding to hear? I'm in charge of, and I prefer to say it this way, I'm in charge of my thoughts and therefore my actions. And you're absolutely right. How much energy do you want to invest in this other person or this other situation, if it doesn't serve you? And you've got the choice. You have the ability to choose to do something else.
And that word choice is so important. There's some people who don't realize they have choices. And in each and every moment, each one of us always has a choice. We have the choice to speak or to remain silent. And if we choose to speak, we have a huge range of choices as to the types of words we are going to speak, the energy with which we're going to speak them, the passion or lack of passion with which we're going to speak them. All of these are choices.
Yeah.
And most of us aren't aware that we have this huge range of opportunity really, to express
And,
ourselves.
and again, it really comes down to the nitty gritty in relationships. And, you can choose to have a relationship, and it's actually a relationship with anything. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, a person, an animal, or a thing. I mean, you've got the choice to decide, what is your relationship with that, and to accept or not accept the responses that you get. So, for example, I have a cat, and sometimes the cat doesn't want to hang around with me. Well, I can choose to say, okay, I'm done with this cat, get rid of it, versus no, this is their choice. I'm choosing to accept this. And I think this is a great fault in so many relationships. And fortunately, I've learned much more of the time, is that when I'm in a relationship with anybody, and this is either intimate or personal or just friendship, it's my choice, to be around this person with the way that they are. It's not up to me to tell them, how they should behave or not. It's only up to me, as you said, is to express any of my feelings, emotions, as part of a exploratory exercise to share, not so much communicate, but to share what's going inside of yourself, and then hopefully find some sort of resolution. And then it's up to the other person to say, great, thanks for that sharing. And I agree with your thoughts on the word communication. So as I share with them how I'm feeling, then it's up to them to decide, to choose, to be aware of their participation or their role in any kind of resolution. And if they choose not to, well, then great. How much energy are you going to put into that?
And a lot of people, because they aren't aware that they have choices, and a lot of people haven't even begun to deal with what's called their own shadow, which would be their own fears and their own shame, their own guilt, their own rage. And if they haven't started looking at that aspect of themselves, they may not want to have a conversation with you or me.
And you're absolutely right. And that's why, on a personal level, what I came to realize is, and I share this in New Zealand, and I share this in many things I talk about, is I'm giving myself permission to be human. And I'm giving myself permission to have my faults and my weaknesses and not making them wrong. There are moments when I'm going to feel bad, I'm going to feel terrible, I'm going to feel embarrassed. But because I'm giving myself permission to have these, I now know something that I can actively work on. And it's in my awareness, when for so many people, it simply isn't. And that becomes a problem. And I love the way that you put it. So many people are just not ready or able to see their shadow.
Which is why I think I have shifted from a position of feeling I have to tell everybody about this amazing experience I had to being in service when people are struggling. When I see people struggling, then I can reach out a hand and say, would you like to talk? Or I understand, I've been where you are.
Mm-hmm.
It opens up a whole deeper level of conversation when you can do that. But um, this whole self-righteousness issue, which I think in the New Testament, isn't that supposed to be the worst of sins, is pride and self-righteousness, thinking that you have all the answers for everybody else, and that you have the right to enforce your views on someone else. It's hard because your own map of your own territory is so right for each one of us, but the maps are not necessarily the same. Incidentally,
Mm-hmm.
that statement comes from Alfred Korzybski, who was a semanticist, and it's so important the maps are the words that we use to describe the experiences. And it's the words that separate us.
Yep.
Lots of times because we don't understand them the same way, even though we think we do. For example, a word like mother. Um, there's the mother who hugs you, and there's the mother who's angry with you, and there's the bossy mother, and there's the fun mother. So there were a lot of different aspects to that single word. And most of us think, well, mother is mother, period, end of story. It's not that simple at all, which is why in each and every moment you need to be tuned into, I'm just using words here, an underlying energy of the words. You get a sense of whether a person is pushing you away or interested in what you're doing just by your interaction with them. Or maybe you're having a lovely flowing conversation, and all of a sudden there's this stop sign that goes up. You've hit a raw point and you don't know what it is because you don't know the full experiences of the other person. You have not perhaps walked in the exact same shoes that they have walked in.
And with that in mind, then I have this question for you. When and it's a beautiful thing that you do in acknowledging, the other person and letting them be witness. And you use the word understand, and like you say, I understand where you're coming from. My question for you then is that a good thing to say because you might not understand, or is another word like I appreciate what's going on in your life? Because I've come across a couple of times when I say, well, I understand. It says, no, you don't. You haven't been in my shoes. How can you possibly understand? Because this is, oh, no, sorry. I appreciate what you're saying to me. I get it. I hear you versus understand. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hear you is a good phrase to use. You don't know how your words are going to come across to another person until they respond or react. And if they react, you realize that in this particular relationship with this particular person, you probably said the wrong thing, but you can't know that ahead of time. You don't know what you've done wrong until you step across a line. And you cross a boundary and you get slapped down, and then you figure, okay, with this person, I'm hitting some kind of a sensitive point there, and better to pull back and just let it be, and perhaps it'll get resolved in another context. It's fascinating to play with because it's not fixed, it's fluid, it's creative. It requires deep listening to the other person and also what's going on around you, the whole context of the situation. And then speaking your own words as clearly as you are able to speak them, just sharing your own perspective as your perspective.
Yeah.
It's a lot of I language. Owning it. Yeah, it's mine. Yeah, and you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to see it the way I see it.
No, I totally agree with you there, and that's why I shared earlier on that communication is a feedback that you get, and when somebody says, and I love when Tony Robbins does this, by the way, he does it in this big audience with people, and he says, "I hate you," right? And then the word is "I hate you," but the way that you say it, and it's just really interesting, or when it says "I love you," sort of thing, and it's just really interesting. We have to manage, our words, our intonation, our body language, and everything else when we're communicating. And the best thing that we can always do is, find out if the person received our communication. And I'm sure you're aware of the Imago technique, the Imago workshops. Are you familiar with those?
No, I'm not as
Harville Hendricks, who wrote a wonderful book together with his wife. He's got a workbook as well called "Get the Love That You Want." And out of that, he's created this Imago workshop It's a very simple technique of actually the process of communication between two people. And it's absolutely a beautiful experience. I found it when I first did it, a spiritual experience with my partner at that time. And it was just beautiful because in that moment, with that process, communication was complete. There was nothing left to question, nothing left in doubt. And, each person was able to fully communicate all the things that they were aware of and stuff that they weren't aware of. And then the other person gets to hear all that stuff and witness it and recognize it. And it's just a beautiful thing. So,
another really interesting thing is that so often, well, there are a couple of points here. So often, my perception of something that's going on is different from the other person's. Now, I can either shut them out and say they're wrong, or else I can open up my own mind to hearing their perception as their perception, and I can learn from that because maybe I hadn't seen it that way. Maybe I hadn't thought of it that way. So it expands me to be open to hearing what another person's perception or understanding or view is. Just one other point I wanted to make was my intentions in speaking can be totally pure, but the speech that I speak, even though it's spoken with a pure intent, may land with an effect that I don't anticipate. So there's a difference between my intention in speaking. I may be intending to be kind and considerate, but because of what's going on in the other person, they hear it as a rebuke or a criticism or something like that. So I don't know where my words are going to land. And I just have to observe and then choose the next set of words or not.
And then what's interesting is what's the role that we take in our response to their response. And, I've had that experience many times and I mishandle it in the sense where my intention was pure, my intention was honest, and it didn't come across like that. And then I went, haywire and did a spiral and everything else. And what's interesting then is because it's really about making sure that you are able to convey that information in the best way, and giving yourself and making it about yourself when some sort of crazy reaction does happen, and it's okay to mess it up and learn from that, and sometimes it's just simply not going to work.
Yeah, and there are times that it doesn't work. The other thing you can do is ask permission. I have some really hard things that I would like to share with you. Are you open to hearing what I have to say? If the person says yes, they're more likely to relax a little bit and take it simply as your speech because they have agreed to listen to it.
And I think that's key. And interesting enough, sometimes I use the request or the invite, can I coach you on something? And that sometimes that's the wrong wording as well. And the truth is, and what I also wanted to share with you is you notice these incredibly charismatic people in the world. And but what's remarkable about them is how they stay focused on you. They don't look at their cell phones. They're not looking at everybody else. They're not paying attention to the other conversation. They've got their full attention on you. And Bill Clinton was very, very good at this, whether you like him or not. But he didn't carry a cell phone. And whenever he connected with somebody, that was his entire world. And it should be the same way that we communicate with others. Rather than me thinking and trying to think, okay, what's the next thing that I'm going to say in this conversation, but rather just listening to everything that you're saying, noticing your body language, noticing all the subliminal signs so that I get the full communication. And I guess, unfortunately nowadays that people are not, placing that time and the energy just to have the full experience. And I love what you're saying, when you talk about experience, there is a full experience to be had if you're fully present in this moment. And I like what you said earlier. It's being in the moment. It's that dance. It's the creativity. It's the co-creation. It's being in the moment, taking it all in, and having a good time.
And if you stop to think about it, if you really think deeply about it, the present moment is all any one of us ever has. And everything is available in the present moment.
Yeah. With those remarkably wise words, I'm going to wrap it up. Dr. Janet Smith Warfield. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I have to tell you, I was very much looking forward to it. We had two goes at this, but we had some technical issues. We had some challenges today, in fact, but we managed it. And really, I have so much respect for you, for what you do and what you share, because at the end of the day, it's now using your word communication. How we end up communicating with ourselves and the world around us really determines, our experience, our life experience. And there's so many aspects into all of that. And I very much look forward to having more conversations with you and with more people about this very, very important topic. I think if we were able to resolve some of the things that you're talking about and teaching others, it's no wonder that you received the award for top female motivational speaker, of the year. So I really want to thank you for today.
Bart, it's been great fun. Thank you so much.